Snow pressed softly against the city like a held breath, and Christmas lights blinked without warmth as a female cop sat alone in a small roadside café, her uniform still crisp while everything inside her felt worn thin. The world outside kept moving, cars sliding past the windows, laughter drifting from somewhere she couldn't see, but for her, the night had narrowed to a single table, a cooling cup of coffee, and the quiet ache of being needed everywhere except the one place that mattered. Christmas had a way of sharpening loneliness, and tonight it cut deep as duty kept her on the streets while families gathered without her. If you believe that kindness can still find people in their loneliest hours and that second chances can rewrite a life, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Grandma Dearie, because stories like this remind us why hope is worth holding on to. She had been on duty since dawn, answering calls that stacked up like unanswered prayers. A stalled car in the cold, a shop alarm tripped by the wind, a welfare check that ended with an empty apartment and unanswered memories. By evening, the city had dressed itself in decorations, but she hadn't noticed, she was too busy keeping the thin line between order and chaos from snapping. When her shift finally allowed a break, she ducked into the cafe for warmth, sitting where the window framed the night like a moving photograph. Her reflection stared back at her, steady and strong, but beneath it lived the weight of a year that had taken more than it gave. She had joined the force believing she could save people, yet the cases that haunted her most were the ones she couldn't fix. The call she arrived too late to, the family she couldn't reunite, the promise she made to herself that she would be home for Christmas and broke again. Across the room, a mechanic in a blue work jacket sat with hands roughened by honest labor, the smell of oil still clinging to him despite the holiday. His garage had closed early that night, not because business was slow but because the cold had turned unforgiving and his crew had families waiting. He stayed behind to finish one last job, a habit he couldn't shake, the kind of man who believed leaving things undone invited regret. When he finally locked up, the café's lights were a beacon, and he stepped inside to thaw fingers stiff from metal and wind. He noticed her without meaning to. The way people notice something real in a room full of decorations, and something in his chest tightened. He didn't know her story, only the tired courage in the way she sat, uniform bearing the marks of long hours and longer resolve. The night pressed on, and the café grew quieter. Outside, a car stalled near the curb, its hazard lights blinking like a nervous pulse. The mechanic watched through the glass, calculating what he could do before the cold worsened. He had tools in his truck, time in his hands, and a choice waiting to be made. He could finish his coffee and go home to a warm dinner, or he could step back into the night and help a stranger. He chose the night, because he always did, and because some choices feel less like decisions and more like obligations written into who you are. As he pulled on his jacket and stepped out, the female cop followed with her eyes, a flicker of attention that would soon turn into something else. Minutes passed, then more. Snow thickened, and the stalled car finally coughed back to life, pulling away with a grateful wave. The mechanic returned, cheeks red, breath steaming, and sat again, not noticing the small spill of sugar on the table or the way the lights reflected off the window like distant stars. He paid for his coffee and, without thinking too much about it, left a second bill folded beneath the receipt, the kind of quiet generosity that doesn't ask to be seen. He glanced once more at the woman in uniform, not out of curiosity but concern, and nodded in a way that acknowledged the shared fatigue of people who serve others when others are celebrating. She discovered the bill later, when the server cleared the table and pressed it gently toward her, explaining with a smile that it had been meant for her. The gesture landed heavier than any call she'd answered that day. It wasn't the money, it was the recognition. Someone had seen her not as an emblem of authority or a function in a system, but as a person carrying a load. The café seemed warmer suddenly, the lights softer, the city less indifferent. She stepped outside, hoping to catch him, but his truck had already disappeared into the snowy streets, leaving behind a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time, that she wasn't invisible. Her shift ended late, and the night's work lingered like frost on her bones. Driving home, she passed the garage, its sign dim but familiar. She remembered a call from earlier that week, a report of a break-in that turned out to be nothing more than a broken lock and a frightened owner. The mechanic's place had been nearby, and he had helped secure the door without complaint, staying until the owner felt safe. Pieces connected quietly, not as a grand revelation but as a gentle understanding that some people show up again and again, not for applause but because it's right. Days later, a storm rolled in harder than expected, snarling traffic and stranding drivers. She was dispatched to an accident that blocked an intersection, her breath fogging as she worked to keep people safe. The mechanic arrived with a tow truck, chains clanking, movements efficient and calm. They worked side by side without words, hands and timing syncing in the practiced way of people who know their roles. In the cold, something warmed between them. Not romance, not yet, but respect, the kind that grows when effort meets effort. The city resumed its flow, and as they parted, she felt a shift inside her, a subtle easing of the year's weight. Christmas morning arrived.